Welcome to the Hardwood Hustle powered by PGC Basketball. We believe in the value of a coach. We're here to educate, empower, and encourage you to lead like never before. One of the most undercoached areas of the game is the mindset and mentality that is needed to perform at our highest level. This week, we finish our series on developing mental skills with part 2 as we discuss composure, toughness, and competitive greatness. Let's get started.
Coaches, welcome back to the Hardwood Hustle. Last episode, we did the first part of a two-parter, and we were talking about player development, specifically one of the components we have on the Key 5 blueprint, which is the mental aspect. And so many times coaches think about shooting, dribbling, passing, being player development, but anybody that's coached long enough knows that even if you get all that right and they're not right mentally, and we haven't poured into them mentally, and they don't have the 5 things that we've been talking about in these 2 episodes, if they don't show up with those, if they don't come and they don't have a great approach, they don't have the right level of confidence, they don't have the 3 we're going to talk about today, which are composure, toughness, and competitive greatness, then it might not matter how good their skills are. And so we know that player development is more than just skills, and we know that the mental approach is really, really important. We know what a tough, competent, composed, we know what a good mental team looks like. And so we're going to go to part 2 today. Me and Sam and Lisa, we're going to talk about composure, toughness, and competitive greatness. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And Sam, I want to get your thoughts first on composure. Like, if we're going to develop players and we want better composure, what are things that we're thinking about? What are we doing in practice? How are we working on it in games? Let's talk composure.
Yeah, so composure is defined as a state of feeling calm or in control of oneself. At PGC, we talk, TJ, about control of body and control of mind. And I think that's what we're talking about right now, control of mind. And so it's also control of mouth and your words. But here's my opening thought, which is if we're going to talk about composure, we need to know what causes us not to be composed. Just like if you want to talk about winning, you sometimes got to know what loses you games. So I would start off with, when does one become uncomposed? Is that a word, Lisa? I think it is. So when you lose your composure, you need to know what triggers that. And so that's my starting piece with your players and your teams. I think in a last point here, like a general overview, what caused us to lose composure? Probably the other team going on a big run. Probably some selfishness on our team where somebody's taking a lot of shots and 2 people have friction and they're yelling at each other. That could cause us to lose composure. A coach being very highly emotional and passionate and yelling at players, if players aren't accustomed to that, that could cause us to lose composure. So those are just a few opening ideas.
Yeah, so absolutely. And I think there's things that are mental and physical that can cause you to lose your composure, like you alluded to. So if we go out there and we're being pressured and we're turning over the ball, players lose composure, right? Like if a player is not making shots, we've seen them lose composure. I think you can also, and Lisa, I'd like your thoughts on this. You can also lose composure because your leader doesn't have composure. I think a lot of times, coaches don't have composure. We do a clip that I've shared many times that we shared our PGC session, and it's Will Ferrell, and we talked about this a little bit in the last episode in Old School, and he's in his underwear in the locker room, banging the locker with his chair and telling players to calm down and be composed. And coaches, so many times we do that. But Lisa, what are your thoughts on things that may cause us to be, whether it's a word or not, uncomposed? And what are some things that not only that players deal with and do, but also how can coaches affect that?
Yeah, I think my first thought about losing your composure in a game, obviously we care, that's what we're thinking about, like how can we help our team, win more games or perform at a higher level, and losing composure certainly doesn't help. So part of that is a focus on the outcome. You're in the middle of the game and you got a bad call. You're in the middle of the game and, like you said, you're turning the ball over, things aren't going right, and there's friction and tension and how we react to that. And so there's one thing I learned, I'll give another rugby reference here, that New Zealand, the All Black, the captain of the team, they did a little documentary on him. And he said one thing that he does before games is he envisions everything that could happen in a game and primarily what could go wrong. And so he's practicing mentally when we don't get that call, or my teammate reacts, or maybe my coach is doing this on the sideline, or, this doesn't go our way. What am I as a captain going to do? So he mentally was practicing, giving himself those reps of keeping his composure and choosing his response. And I think sometimes when we lose our composure, we aren't choosing our response and we're just reacting in the moment. And so my thing for teams and players is we have to put them in situations in practice where there's some adversity so that they can get this skill down. And I think whether it's mental reps before or on their own, or teaching them to do it, and absolutely coaches modeling how to respond is huge for keeping our composure and going back to focusing on the process. Like, we're in the middle of the game, what can we control is something you always want your players thinking about.
Yeah, Sam, take us a little deeper on this one, building off what Lisa just said. One of my favorite teachings we do at PGC is we talk about a mistake reaction and a mistake response. And I don't think players or coaches often think about this, but that's what, from the All Blacks, the captain, that's what he's thinking about. He's planning for when things go wrong. And most people plan for everything to go well in the game. My shots are going to go in. We're going to be up 10. We're going to do it. But we know that's not true. We know that there's long-term and short-term things that are going to go bad. One of the things I do with my team in the beginning of the year is we role play what it looks like when you don't get the playing time you don't want. So we're planning for how we're going to show up when that happens halfway into the season or 5 games into the season. But Sam, break that down for us a little bit, the mistake response versus a mistake reaction.
Yeah, so a reaction is something that is unplanned and we react to it. A response is a pre-planned response, just like Lisa was talking about. And so most people in life, if you're watching this on YouTube, you have a remote control in your hand. They give out the remote control to their feelings to anyone. We're driving down the road, somebody pulls out in front of us, we react to them. We're playing a basketball game, an opponent talks trash to us and it throws us for a loop, or our coach gets onto us, or a teammate says something, or the fans in the stands. We react and we don't have control we don't have composure because we're reactors. And the best players, or let me back up, the most mentally tough players, the most mentally composed players are ones that have a mistake response. And we talk about it too, where, through the course of the game, there's runs, there's ups and downs and lulls and highs, and there's going to be mistakes made. And in that moment, when a mistake is made, do you energize or do you droop? Most players droop. Most players droop, meaning they don't get the foul they wanted. They turn to the referee. They airball a shot. They look at their hand, like their hand did something to it. No, like, what a good player does? They sprint back on defense and they talk on defense. They're not living moment to moment. They've predetermined their approach and their how they're going to respond to the good and the bad. Hey, here's another response. When things go well, you make a shot. Do you run down the court hitting 3 fingers, or do you point to the passer? And we have to help our players know how to build in responses. It's not done overnight. It's not done after they heard us give a speech before the game. We have to work at it and build those habits into our arsenal.
Yeah, and one of the things I think is really important there is like actually physically building something in, and one of the things that we teach at PGC is the 2 claps. So I turn the ball over and, it doesn't have to be 2 claps, but let's just say that's what we're working on, that they turn the ball over and they clap twice. And that's the trigger that says, move on to the next thing, flush it. I think you've probably heard before, NBA, next best action. Like, what's the next best thing that I can do? And what is it, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's a tug on your shirt. Maybe it's a, snap. It's what I used to do in high school. I wore a rubber band. I don't think you do it anymore, but I used to just snap it real fast, and it'd be a little bit of pinch on my wrist would remind me to move on to the next thing. And so having something that triggers move on to the next thing. And coaches, I think you find it really valuable if you were able to do that with your players. If every day in practice, a mistake had some sort of planned response that your team used to help them remember, I've got to flush this. I've got to move on to the next best action. A lot of times it's not mistakes that beat you in a game. It's the carryover from mistakes. It's the one mistake that leads to the next mistake. One of the classic video clips we show is one player turning the ball over and then just standing there while the other team sprints the other way to get a layup. And then that's a reaction. And we also have clips of players that turn the ball over, immediately turn, sprint back, get their hand on a ball, get it out of bounds, and they have a response. And that's the difference in 2 points. But there's so many times over the course of the game, and very true, like Lisa talked about a second, for coaches. This is one that I am average and hopefully getting better at. Like I need a better mistake response, and so hard in the emotions of the game sometimes not to get carried away with the call that you think might cost you the game or whatever it might be. And we've got to bounce back quickly too, because we've got to lead the troops. So a lot of things to think about right there with composure. Let's move on to the next one, and toughness. And gosh, I would almost say this is probably one that coaches stew on all the time. Who doesn't want a tougher team? Who doesn't want toughness in their players? But so many times I think coaches just fall back to, I don't have tough players, and so I'm just got what I got. But again, we don't want to base our game on hope. We want tough players. And player development, toughness should be a part of making better players, and better players need to be mentally sound, and mentally sound players have mental toughness.
All right. So I think with toughness, it always starts with defining it. I think we talk about it as coaches and we say we want tough teams, or we come in the locker room and say we're not tough, but we've never really defined it. So we have to define it. We have to give examples of it. And then we have to give the why behind it. The why behind it for me would be, hey, if we're a team that's serious about reaching our potential, if we're a team that's serious about playing for championships, we have to be tough. And, I always relate it to life too. Like life will throw things at you, as a player and as an adult later in their life and now in their life. And so our ability to be tough is really important to be successful on the court and in life. And so I think it starts there. You got to give them the why, give them examples. So let me give some examples. Toughness to me is, being consistent, showing up to practice early and doing your early work. Toughness is talking on defense when you're tired. Toughness is being a great teammate when things aren't going well for you. These are all things. Now, you asked me about player development. How do we build it in? Well, how do we get tougher? We've got to go through tough things. And sometimes those happen organically. Sometimes we have to fabricate them and create them for our players. And so in a player development workout, I think you're getting physical, mental, and skill. You're getting those 3 components in any good player development. And so you can challenge players physically, which will challenge them mentally, meaning you're putting them through a very strenuous, tough workout that's physically demanding. That will challenge them mentally. And I think that's one way you can do it, TJ. And then the other thing, toughness, is challenge your players off the court. And I know I'm going to have some coaches laughing while they're driving a car, or, people laugh at me when I say this stuff. But you need to take a cold shower. Maybe not for 3 minutes, but for the first 30 seconds, turn that water and let that cold water where you can't even breathe. Yeah, you need to grab the squash and eat it. I hate squash. My dad used to make me eat it when I was younger. I couldn't get up from the dinner table. I hate it to this day. I can't. It makes me throw up. Well, guess what I do sometimes when I'm at a restaurant? I order squash, and I hate it. Why? Because it makes me tougher. I got to keep an edge as a person and a father and a husband and a coach. Do the tough things in life. Have the conversation with somebody that you've been putting off because you're justifying why you have it. So I think as coaches, you can't just keep it on the court. You got to take it off the court for them so they can work at it.
Yeah. And for those of you that don't know, that Allen household is intense, right? I mean, just toughness drills going on left and right with all of the kids. Here's my thought on toughness. I think there's 3 different types of coaches, or 3 different categories of this with coaches. I think there's coaches that feel like toughness isn't something you can change. You either have it or you don't. And so they just kind of live with what they have and what they got, which is one option. I think there's another type of coach that tries to sprinkle in toughness. Let's do a loose ball drill. Let's do whatever. And they try and pick and choose different times to make their team tough. And then I think there's a third, which is they clearly define what tough is, and they hold the standard on the toughness. And I think one of the hardest things to do in that category 3 is actually just define what toughness is and pick that out. I'm going to give a challenge to you as coaches. Pick 3 to 5 things that you determine are really tough and hold the standard on that. And so, Lisa and Sam, let's talk about this for just a second. So, do you think it would be tough if your players ran all out every single time in transition? I think it'd be pretty tough, don't you? I mean, like, what team runs 100 miles an hour as fast as they can every possession of a game? Very few teams I've ever seen do that, right? I mean, so I would say that's tough. I mean, like that's if you could get your team to run 100% every time, like I would say that's a pretty tough team that does that. What about if your team hit 95% of their box outs? Forget the rebound, whatever, they just hit the box out. I mean, that'd be pretty tough. I mean, most teams probably hit it in the 50, 60, maybe 70% range. Like that would be really tough. What if your team really set hard screens and held them, right? That'd be tough. Like what if your team every time they caught, squared up to the rim, put their eyes to the rim on every catch, they were super disciplined. Like I think there's things outside of what people typically think of as tough that are really actually tough. Like it's hard to set a good screen every time. It's hard to run in transition every time. It's hard to cut hard every time. And at the end of the day, I think if you just pick 3 to 5 things that you wanted, and that was the metric where you were being measured on toughness, you could go back and watch game film and say, listen, a tough player is going to cut hard every single time. And then you go watch one of your players and they cut hard 3 out of 10 times. Well, you've defined that as toughness. We're cutting hard every time. And you go back and 3 out of 10. So on a scale of 1 to 10, you're a 3 on toughness when it comes to cuts. And I don't think you can make it everything. And I think generally we go to like, do you get on the floor for loose balls or do you whatever? But there's a lot of hard things to do in the game of basketball that you probably could pick 30 of them and measure out the toughness on it. But
sorry, let me interject. So I agree with you, TJ, and I would challenge coaches too. And I raised my hand of guilty as charged at times. Toughness is not as a coach. When you are getting out hustled or you're missing or whatever, how you define it, you come in the locker room at halftime and you kick over the trash can and you throw a basketball and you drop 14 F-bombs about how weak your team is and how non-tough they are. That doesn't mean anything. That doesn't mean you're tough. That same coach who hasn't been living it out daily with their team, they haven't been doing the tough things, then you're not tough. So you being tough guy or tough woman in the locker room by throwing things and dropping F-bombs, I see that mistake where we think that's a level of tough. Now, you could do that too and be extremely tough. Like, I'm not saying you can go in and drop as many F-bombs you want. You might be the toughest dude in the room or toughest gal in the room. I see that play out a lot where we exude, or we as coaches are challenging the toughness of our players, yet we're not living it out. Last point on that, we were in Atlanta clinic. I thought Mike Neighbors did a great job bringing this up. You'll remember this, TJ, at Glazier Atlanta coaching clinic, probably 2016. We had an early bird session at 7:30 in the morning where we have like high level top college coaches, pro coaches on the panel. And there was about 25 out of 500 coaches that showed up. And Mike Neighbors was like, hey, my players know that I'm here right now. They know I'm doing the tough stuff. I'm waking up early. And if I'm going to ask them to run an extra sprint or lift an extra weight or to do an extra shooting drill, they've got to see me doing stuff that's tough and uncomfortable too. So I think that's an important point in the conversation.
Yeah. And, there is some level of inherent toughness to different people and different players. Like I think some people have it more ingrained in them than other people do. But let's just say that you want to be a good offensive team. And I'm just going to give this again. Like sometimes I think we think of just physical contact as toughness. But what if your team cut hard every single play? You would be hard to guard. And I think you would be a tough team to defend offensively because you move so fast, so hard, so that to me is something that you could get every person on your team to do and say that we're playing tough on offense versus like, I don't know if you can get every player on your team to dive headfirst for the loose ball every single time. There is. That's a really hard battle. And so I think maybe just reshaping, rethinking about, where can I actually win in developing toughness in my team, and rethinking about what that might look like can help coaches to realize I do have some control over toughness. Lisa, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me is when you define it and you put it out there and you say, okay, tough's going to be these things. I think we just want to use this lingo really bad because it's like a badge of honor to say how tough you are. So just think about all the things you guys were saying. And I think the next mistake can come when you just want to have that urge of we're not being tough, like, or that's not tough. I think we have to almost get away from that language in terms of the negative when you want to see a change in your team and just name what you want to see. And then if you want to praise them for being tough, I think this is just more of calling out when they get it right. Yeah, like, man, we're cutting hard every single time. That's tough. We're on the right track, right? Versus just saying at some point we're not being tough enough or we need to be tougher on offense. I think you just need to name what do you want to see, and we use it too much in the negative, and we don't really give players clarity. And even after we've defined it, I think we can still confuse players when they're getting some things right. Maybe they're running the floor hard, or maybe they're getting after the rebound, or maybe they're hitting their box outs, but they didn't cut hard a few times. Well, now you're calling some player that's not tough. You're calling them not tough, but they're getting a lot of things right. And so I think it can get confusing. So we just need to make sure we always have clarity for players, affirming them for what they're getting right, and helping them, build their self-awareness and on what they can change.
Lisa, I got one quick point on that. I agree, Lisa. I think you can be tough and have a weak moment, and you could be weak and have a tough moment, just like we can be growth minded and have a fixed mindset moment. So I think I'm not putting words in your mouth, or maybe I'm not saying this the right way. If I was coaching you, you were you were a tough player. You were our toughest player, but then you did something that didn't exude toughness. It would be, in a good culture, I would say, Lisa, gosh, you're our toughest player. But I tell you what, in the second half, you weren't tough for us. You laid down on defense and you stopped cutting hard on offense because your shot wasn't fun. I think as coaches, you can present it that way. It's just an honesty with your players.
Yeah, I think you have to also get comfortable with what you're accepting or believe is okay for tough. Like, when I think sometimes people look at Houston and think they're tough, like they guard you, they rebound, they whatever, you know what I mean? Like, and they are tough. Like, I think that's a tough team. But I think you could also get comfortable with the fact, let's just take like Princeton and a team that comes and upsets somebody and whatever. And like every time they make good, sharp, crisp passes to the outside hand, they hit the back door at the back foot, they cut hard, they go like, that's hard to do. Like, that's mentally tough too. And, obviously they probably would like to be a little tougher on defense, but they don't have the same capabilities Houston has. And Houston's super tough on defense. Maybe they could get a little tougher on offense. Maybe they could get a little bit tougher mentally in their shot selection. Maybe like we could all stand to get tougher. But I think sometimes we just have one definition of tough. But I would consider some of the Princeton or Harvard teams I've seen play, like the way they play, that's tough. Right. And then also the way Houston play, that's tough. And so I think you have to, as a coach, get comfortable with what is your definition of tough, and can I hold the standard of that tough? And it has to be achievable. Like asking the Princeton kids to do what Houston's doing is not possible defensively. Now they could max out effort and all that, but they're just not capable of doing some of those same things. And vice versa. Maybe it's the same both ways. But I think for coaches, I think the point is you can have some control over toughness, and you can really make an impact with your team on toughness. So don't just wave the white flag and figure out how to get to that place of building a tough team. So I know we could go on that one for a while, but let's get on to the third one, which is competitive greatness. And this is on John Wooden's pyramid here of I don't think it's any coincidence that he left it off, but competitive greatness, something we often talk about, but it's oftentimes something that kind of gets lost. Like it's just kind of out there in the wind. And we think, oh, Michael Jordan or Tom Brady, or they're competitively great, but there's a lot more to competitive greatness. So I'd like to open up just getting either one of your thoughts on what is kind of like the other two, kind of getting the definition of it. What is competitive greatness?
Well, I would just start by, I think it's pushing yourself, striving for your best every single day. And I think that's really hard, but I think when you just look at the root word of being competitive, and it's striving, and it's like I've talked about this before, but like competing is literally designed to make you better, like to bring the best out of you. And the best competition we know, whether in practice or in games, makes us better. And so competitive greatness is taking that up a notch and applying that to all aspects of who we are as people, as players on the court, off the court. Or, are we showing up? Are we prepared? Are we ready to go? Are we making everything we can game-like as possible? Are we making our teammates better because that's going to make our team better? All those things, it's kind of like the ultimate of putting all the pieces together. And we can get some little things right along the way, but it's those special players who see the big picture and I think can try to make themselves better as much as they mature, right? We're talking about if we got young high school or youth players and they're growing up, they're going to have to figure this out, year by year. But it's applying those things so that they're getting better and they're making other people better. It's not just about winning. It's being able to reach your potential because you're pushing yourself.
Yeah, I want to flip it back for a second, TJ, put you on the spot. How do you define competing or competitive greatness?
I've always gone with John Wooden's theory of like it's being at your best when your best is needed. And, I think there's competitive, and I think a lot of people do that. And then when the going gets tough, like how do you show up in the most crucial moments of when it's needed the most of you? And I think that's where Tom Brady and Michael Jordan rightfully get that name of competitively great, because they were always very, very competitive. Larry Bird, Sue Bird. I mean, think about those people. They're always competitively great. But I was thinking about the other day when, in some of those playoff games that they were always good, but they were something different about them when it was needed the most. And so I like his little caveat there of when it's needed most.
But isn't it also needed the most sometimes when you don't expect it? Like, yes, I think we think of the big time moments where they stepped up and they were able to perform under pressure. But I also think it's in the, when nobody's in the gym and you're getting in there on your own and nobody else can see that the work you're putting in. And I'm sure they all did those things too, but it's not just turning it up a notch. I think it's also checking all these little boxes along the way that nobody even noticed.
Well, I think that's the reason they were able to be competitively great, is because they did check those boxes that you're talking about. You know what I mean? Like, I think that I think so many times players talk about being competitive or competitive greatness. They probably don't use that terminology, competitive greatness, but a lot of people think they're just going to rise to this level when it comes. But why does Sue Bird, Larry Bird, Michael Jordan, Tom Brady, whoever you want to name, Roger Federer, like just think about all the great athletes. Why did they rise? Why were they capable of rising to that? Because they had checked all those boxes you're talking about, Lisa. You know what I mean? Like they'd actually paid that price. And so I don't know if competitive greatness is within everybody, right? Like if you haven't done the work, don't expect yourself to rise to this special occasion. And I think, that Navy SEAL quote, Sam probably say it better than I do, but I think that one really rings out true in this scenario.
The definition of compete, I like definitions, is the strive to gain or win something by defeating or establishing superiority over others who are trying to do the same. I think both of you are true. That was where my mind went too, Lisa, when you said what you just said, which is, I think it's both. Yeah, watching somebody rise up, it's like somebody asked Deion Sanders, like, how fast are you the fastest person on the football field? He's like, yeah, I'm always faster than the next person because I compete. So I when they run their fastest, I do a little bit more. I mean, there's an element to like rising up to that level of competition in the moment that we see great competitors do. But then it's also the work behind the scenes and when nobody's watching. And I love Anson Dorrance, his quote, it's the vision of a champion is someone who's bent over, drenched in sweat at the point of exhaustion when no one else is watching. Like, I love that quote because I think that's a great competitor, and that's competitive greatness is the ability to push yourself in a gym by yourself when nobody's watching or with a teammate. ESPN's not there. Nobody's got their phone out documenting, and you're getting after it. That's competitive greatness, and then it allows you to perform, when the lights do come on and when there is competition out there.
Yeah. I think that's right. But I also think like competitive greatness, like I don't know if it's achievable by everybody, but it's what you're striving for. And when you get into like sweating in the gym, all those different things, like I'd say that's competitive effort, like competitive work, competitive what. But when I think of competitive greatness, like it comes together for some people, like when we think about these moments when Roger Federer and Nadal get into, or Djokovic get into one of these matches and nobody really lost it. They were both competitively great. Just somebody edged one person out. Or I think about the playoffs last year when Patrick Mahomes and Chad, what's his name, Allen from the Buffalo Bills. Like, you remember that, how they like scored like 4 or 5 touchdowns in the last minute and a half, like unbelievable plays, and just great competitors one-upped each other. And they went through, so I think it's a combination of they were very talented. Plus they put in the work. Plus they had the mental toughness, confidence, and composure. Like it's really, I think the last one on this list, because it's all of those things together. So I think somebody can put in all of the work in the world in the gym and not have the confidence or not have the composure, like haven't worked on that piece of it, and not show up competitively great. That's why I think it's, to me, like the pinnacle, like the top one. Like it's not, I think we want these things to be achievable by everybody, but I don't know if competitive greatness is achievable by everybody.
Y'all both brought this up, but like you can be a great competitor and lose. Is Jim Kelly, who played for the Bills, lost 4 Super Bowls, is he just not a great competitor? John Stockton or Karl Malone, because they got beat by Jordan. Jerry West, who played in lost 7 or 8 NBA finals, but you look at his stats in NBA finals games, it's ridiculous. Is he not a great competitor? I think you do, have to be careful not to box somebody in. If you could lose, like TJ, you said, I think the thing that comes to my mind, it's not that somebody lost, somebody just ran out of time. Like in football, they just didn't have the ball last. And the great quarterback, if they had gotten the ball back, they would have scored again because they're just so great. And so it is, you do see great competitors when the going gets tough. They rise to another level. Their focus sharpens. They don't cower in the moment. They don't worry about fear of failure. They're just courageous and they go after it. And I think that's where you see competitive greatness come out.
Yeah, and I see the competitive greatness coming out in this group right here. I mean, we're just anxious to debate this one, and we could go on for a long time. But coaches, hopefully we just kind of got you thinking in the way of developing players beyond just the skills. I mean, when we talk about, the approach and confidence and composure and toughness and competitive greatness, like, if we were being honest with ourselves, we're not working on this stuff enough. We believe it matters, but we're really not working on it. We're spending 10 times the amount of effort on ball handling as we are on building a tougher player or composure in a player. And I think you'd really like the benefits if you paid attention to the mental aspect of developing a player. So, hey, we'd love to hear your thoughts at Hardwood_hustle and give us some feedback on what you're doing to develop players mentally. But Lisa and Sam, enjoyed having these conversations with you today. She is Lisa and he is Sam and I am TJ, and we are the Hardwood Hustle.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Hardwood Hustle, where we believe in the value of a coach. We want to bring you quality content and journey with you. Stay connected with us on Twitter and Instagram. You can find us at Hardwood_hustle. From the Hardwood Hustle team, thanks again. We can't wait to be with you again next week.